Thank you for joining us. My name is Phil Gore. I work with the VSBA and had the privilege to be a part of the recent 2022 VSA VSBA annual conference. And we've got some panelists with us today. I'll have them introduce themselves, and then we'll talk about the purpose of what we want to talk about in this webinar. So, Flora, you're unmuted. Do you want to go first?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was unmuted. Hi, everybody. I'm Flora Diaz-Smith. I am the Vice President of Vermont School Boards Association, and I am the chair of the Washington Central Supervisory Union. Nice to be here.
Flora, how many of these annual conferences have you attended through the years? Do you know, approximately?
I don't know. Dates back to two previous executive directors, so I would say 9. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And we have Jody Emerson. Jody, tell us a little bit about yourself and perhaps how many of these conferences you've attended.
I'm Jody Emerson. I'm the Superintendent Director of the brand new Central Vermont Career Center School District. And this is my first year as a superintendent and my first year attending the conference.
Thank you. And we've got Chelsea from the VSA, who was very involved in planning the conference. Chelsea?
Yep. Hi, I'm the Associate Executive Director at the Vermont Superintendents Association, and I have been to and planned for 5 fall conferences now, although 3 of them were virtual.
Yeah, it was great to be in person. Nancy, we'll take you next. Give us your name, your role, perhaps how long you've served, and then if you can count how many of these conferences you've attended.
Okay, I'm Nancy Russell. I am a school board member from the Hartford School District, and I have been a member of the Hartford School District for 6 years and a member of the VSBA board for 4. And I was trying to remember back, and I can count 5 conferences that I've been to with you guys.
Thank you. And last but not least, Neil.
Thanks, Phil. So my name is Neil O'Dell. I'm the current president of the VSBA Board of Directors, board member from Norwich, Vermont, which is also part of an interstate school district with Hanover, New Hampshire, which is Dresden. I'll try to answer Phil's questions. How long? So I think I've been on the board probably around 13, 14 years. Probably been to as many conferences as Flora. I'm going to say like 9 or 10. Which then begs the question, right? So what did I do for those first 3 or 4 years that I was a board member and didn't come to one of these? And I will just say that I was uninformed. I was an uninformed board member. Really, I reflect back on that time of like, I really should have been going to these things from the moment that I joined the board because they've been hugely helpful and I've learned a lot. So that's my advice to all new board members.
That's a great segue, Neil. I became a school board member about 20 and a half years ago in Washington State, and attending the fall conference wasn't an option. The superintendent's administrative assistant signed me up, and she signed me up for a pre-conference that was all about 6 or 8 hours of drinking from the fire hose of new board member orientation. And I know what she was doing. I know she realized I needed some learning or some schooling, I might even say. And certainly it was a valuable but tremendous experience. And something I didn't expect at all was all of a sudden I had this network of acquaintances who were on school boards in my region and around the state, and people that I'm still in contact with today that I met at my first state school boards conference more than 20 years ago. So as we think about sort of the benefits of attending a state association conference, there's always a lot to learn. And I think, for those of us that want to be lifelong learners, continuous learners, in order to be able to dig into not only complex content, but sometimes basic content. I mean, I'm amazed at how just a refresher can jar things in a new way. I've been listening to a book on audio that's I'm probably going through it the 5th time. And just this morning, I was picking up some things that I'd never just hadn't retained before. So again, there's the learning experience, but also the networking. And I've seen this happen a couple of times in other states where people met at one annual conference one year and found they had some things in common. They might have been sitting down to lunch or in a session together. They might have just been sharing a drink in the evening together. And as they got talking, they realized they had these common interests, and then came back and presented at the conference next year with a new friend, if you will, on things that were important to them. So there's just really a lot of benefits of attending a state school boards conference, and in our case, a conference that's really designed for board superintendent teams, being able to get away together and learn from each other, but build relationships. And so we want to talk about some of those. And I want to give all of the panelists an opportunity to share, a minute or two, one of your big takeaways. And if things start to be duplicating, give us another takeaway, or always feel free to pass. And I'll try to go in the reverse order we just started and try not to miss anyone. So Neil, what was the takeaway for you from this year's annual conference?
I think, obviously the theme of this year's conference of how the students are doing, but I'll go a little bit farther than that. I think that I use the collective we, right? I mean, I know it was a lot of work by Chelsea and, members of the organizations to put this together, but the way that things were woven together, right? So what does effective board service look like? What does a good board do? How does it function well? And then how does that then tie in with student outcomes or how the students are doing? And so for me, I thought the big benefit was how you all tied things together, so that board members can really see the work that we do on the board level is very important for how well the students are doing in our school system. And I hope that folks walked away with that message from this year's conference, because I think it was very important, and we put it together, I think, really, really well.
That's good to hear. Chelsea can comment on that if she wants to as we go along. But Nancy, I think you're next. What was the takeaway for you? And we do need to mention that Nancy was a member of a board that the entire board and superintendent were there learning together as well as growing together. So thank you for that, Nancy.
Oh, thank you. It was really good for us as a board. We've been through a lot of situations, opportunities this past year. It was really hard for me to pick one thing that was the biggest takeaway for me. But one of the things that I heard said was that, and it's interesting because Phil put this, has this, I think, up on one of the slides, and it's the if you're always putting out fires, then you can't be watching out for the fires. You can't be preparing them. I have a really dear friend who is a fireman, and I was talking about this example that we had heard, and that's the slide, and he said, said you could relate putting out fires or being a fireman to being a school board. And how are you doing that? And you look at prevention, you look at detection and communications, you look at protection. Then how are you going to contain all of this, and how are you going to extinguish it? So that we can be everything that we do, everything that we bring to our school districts is continuously applied. And as firemen, they have to do all those things. And I think as school board members, we have that responsibility to get that information out to our teachers and to the rest of our district about what's going on, and communicate that to our communities too, which seems to be something that we have been continually working on here in our district. And I think that's the biggest takeaway. It helped me to have a visual. I'm a very visual person, and that helped me to have that visual. So I'm always seeing that big fire lookout and looking out for fires instead of just trying to always put them out.
Yeah. Well, Chelsea, I know you were a bit preoccupied during conference, as several of us were, but for you, what was a takeaway of this year's conference, either content-wise or perhaps a conversation with someone?
Yeah, I echoed Neil's sentiment. I think that the thread was perfectly timed. I think we're bombarded right now with the question of like, what's the learning loss, or like, in those kind of more technical, like getting into the academics really without first asking ourselves how the students are doing. So I think it was an apt question and framing. And one thing that I've been trying to incorporate in all of the conferences, both our fall conference and our spring conference with administrators, is more touch points to students. And I think that our future is bright, and that there's only more benefit we can seek from having strong adult youth partnerships in both governance and throughout the whole system. So I would say that is my point of optimism as I left the conference, and continuing to build those connections, build those bridges, knowing that we have quite a ways to go, but feeling very optimistic. Plus, they were just brought some levity that I think all conferences need. So
that's great. Jody, I think you're next. What was a takeaway at the conference for you this year?
So my board is a little unique in that I have 6 board members from my sending schools, and 3 of them were there representing their sending schools and me, sort of. So it was nice to interact with them in a different setting, and with a couple of my superintendents from sending schools as well. So that was a really key piece of working with them and learning with them. I really appreciated the keynote and their story, the example of a lawyer who's a school board member who tells the school board that what they want to do is illegal and they don't listen, and then they get told it's illegal. That was enlightening, and happens, I think, frequently, because people just don't know sometimes and or don't want to listen occasionally. I think it's more they just don't know. And then I also really appreciated the discussion around all of us have an experience with school, and school today isn't necessarily the school that I went to or the school that my parents went to, and understanding how much that has changed and how much more it needs to change. There are things that I would love to see change that I don't think we can think about, because we're so stuck in how everything's always been done. It's hard to think about any other way to do it. And so just bringing attention to that was really important.
Well, that's great. Flor, a takeaway for you?
Yeah, there's so many, and I've agreed with what everybody had said. I also was struck by Kay and by Frank. You know, I've always feel like that networking and bringing together how we are all interconnected in the state, how we can learn from each other is the biggest takeaway for me, and then connecting that to nationwide too. Like what is our, you know, the kids in Vermont are all our kids, seeing everybody sitting down and really concerned about public education, really have that hat of equity. All of our workshops were so in line with how students are doing, and adding the Act One workshop to this was like, you know, just putting a little bit of extra sweetness to me in the conference. So yeah, I appreciate everything, but mostly the networking and how we are understanding how we are all interconnected, and the importance of public education and the way that we all behaved, even when it was, you know, like we were really demonstrating good, you know, maybe we don't all agree in everything, but we were all having really important conversations in a civil way.
That's good. I'm going to share this image from Kay's presentation again, and several of you have mentioned the keynote. Obviously, not everybody would know, but Kay and I have been close friends for 12 to 14 years, and I was her supervisor for more than 7 of those years. But when we were talking about who would be a great speaker to speak to school boards and school board hearts and issues, Kay just rose to the top of a list of 2 or 3 that's like, wow, I know she's a great presenter, but she has that depth and heart as well. She asked us this question about the kids, what do they have in their backpacks? And I've been thinking a lot about this for all of us. What do we have in our backpacks? What are we carrying around? And as Kay spoke into kind of mental health aspects as well as just social emotional health, she shared with us a lot of Vermont statistics about how the students are doing, and it's concerning, right? I think we share that concern. My hope would be also, though, for school board members and superintendents and all administrators to be aware of what we're also carrying, the loads we're carrying and the challenges that we're carrying. And as I talk with board members, it's kind of a constant reminder of, being a little more kind or a little more gracious to each other, because you just don't know what people are going through. You just never know, from one moment to the next, particularly in a school board situation, what people are bringing with them. That was valuable to me. And some of the other things Kay had to share, like she used a lot of the concepts from a book that I've promoted a lot in the state called The Governance Core. And that's partly where she gets the fire tower from. But I think, helping board members be mindful of how they conduct themselves as a governance team and how that can affect students and the system seems to be really valuable too. Those were some statistics that Kay had shared with us of just the percentage of students that were feeling either sad or hopeless, and even those that were, more on the border of self-harm, potentially suicide too. These are real issues that students and adults are dealing with today. Mention that governance core, and then really just highlighting, some of our most vulnerable students are those that come from LGBT or LGBTQ community with tendencies, likelihood to be bullied or have safety issues, concerns, and just a whole lot of additional things in their backpacks that they bring. And so, it was great to have the emphasis on equity throughout the conference, but having that challenge or question, if you will, of how are the students doing. This was a slide that was shared in one of the breakout sessions. And I think it's really valuable to help us think, not just size, shape, race, sexual orientation, or any of those kind of identifiers, but also with ableism. And just, are we addressing equity when it comes to ableism? So there were multiple great sessions. In fact, I think 3 that really spoke at the heart of equity, what it is and what it isn't. And I'm going to give an opportunity for Chelsea if she'd like to highlight or underscore either anything from the Act 1 working group session or some of the other themes of equity that we had throughout the conference. Chelsea, is there something you would highlight particularly about equity and maybe the work that we need to do together?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we are doing our job when equity is in everything that we do. In all of the conferences, in all of the workshops, that it is viewed and presented in a way that has a lens over it that is equitable and inclusive and anti-racist. So I will say that we will, I think, continue to have learning experiences that make us better at planning conferences so that is the case. And I was really happy to be a part of a couple workshops. I've actually never presented at our fall conferences. This was one of the first times, and I was kicking myself, like leading up. I was like, I have so much to do, but I was so glad because the conversations were so rich. We had one conversation going on that was with Sandra Cameron from the VSBA, and Nikki Whaley, who is from the Arizona School Boards Association. And that kind of signals a little bit of a kicking off of a potential partnership with the VSBA, and seeing like what it is that their association and our associations can do in collaboration to bring more equity tools to school boards in the state of Vermont. So I wasn't a part of that, so I can't speak too specifically about it, but I'm pretty excited about that. The other one was, as Flora mentioned, about what's coming with the Act One working group. So Act One of 2019 established a working group that would bring ethnic and social equity studies to Vermont schools through the means of standards, developing standards or recommending standards to the state board. And so over the past several years, I've sat on the Act One working group board, and we have developed a recommended revision to the State Board of Education, highlighting how we think those kind of visioning document, which is what I would say the education quality standards are, how it can be more anti-discriminatory, equitable, anti-racist, inclusive, all of the things that I think the majority of Vermont believe in, but really putting a name to that, especially as we see a lot more divisiveness across the country. So the conversation that we had in that was really on how the school boards can stay within their function and really help support the implementation if and when. But I would say, regardless of whether it comes to fruition in its totality, that these are all things that we would stand by anyways, even if they were not in rules. Things like promoting critical thinking around history, being a welcoming space. And you can see some of the examples on the slide that were part of that workshop. And what I think was really a cool space is we actually had a representative from this Vermont State Board. We had Floor, who had represented VSBA in their subcommittee to review the recommended changes. I was a part of the working group. And then we had the chair of the Act One working group, Amanda Garces, who is actually also a school board member in Montpelier. So the conversation was super rich. And what I think it highlighted was that people are eager and willing to do this, don't want to be alone in doing it, and have some real concerns with how complex and sometimes scary it can be to lead in these spaces. So we encouraged everyone to not feel like they're doing it alone and to reach out. There's plenty of state resources. So yeah, that was pretty long-winded, but I think important.
It's good. I wonder, Floor, since you were part of that session too, is there anything you'd like to share about that working group or the session itself?
I think the only thing I would add to what Chelsea said, because she covered everything, is that we tried our best to show people, that both administrators and the school board members, that the work that the Act One group is doing is to call in people to this work, and we're not trying to call out people. And I think there's a lot of misunderstandings and fear from administrators and even school board members that it, like by bringing this work, you're like, sort of like labeling people. And what we're trying to do is just bring everybody into the importance and the foundation of this work in equity and justice for all. It benefits all, not just our BIPOC population.
Great. I want to give opportunity just in case, Neil, Nancy, or Jody would want to underscore or say anything additional. Equity was a theme really woven throughout the conference from beginning to end as well. And very prominent, certainly on Friday with the students there, and a lot of things they had to share.
Phil, if I can, I think what I would just add, right, is I think one of the great things about the conference was the ability to have these conversations, and in particular, hearing from the students, right, in their own voices, what their experiences were in the school. I think what the challenge can be sometimes for boards, right, and it goes back to something that Chelsea said, and even the slide that you showed earlier about the fire tower, right? How do you take that knowledge of what you see or hear that the students are experiencing, right, but then apply that at the appropriate board level, right? We don't want board members, going into schools and running schools. I think we all know that, right? But I think the challenge can sometimes come after that, is if you know what you're not supposed to do, how do you figure out what you are supposed to do? And the board focus at the appropriate level to address these issues without, getting too much into the weeds can sometimes be the challenging part for folks. And so I think, one of the benefits of the conference is to have those discussions, hear from other boards as to what they've done, but also continue to engage with the VSBA, because we can certainly provide you guidance in that area to make sure that the board work is at the appropriate level.
And I wonder, on student voice in particular, perhaps Nancy or Flor have some ideas for how your board incorporates student voice into its discussions, decision making, anything that you might share along that line?
It was unmuted again. Nancy, you want to go first? Because I just stopped.
Sure. We do have student reps on our board, and we have been discussing this very thing, that we're not making as good of a use of that student rep and what that student rep can bring to us, other than what's happening in the school, which most of us already realize what's going on anyway. We also have a group that last year was formed of the staff, and it's a group that meets once a week for an hour after school. I was invited to come and join that group, and so it's been a great privilege for me to be in there listening to these teachers and hearing directly from them what's going on in this particular arena in our school. It's been easier for me to bring it back to the board as a kind of a mini report without breaking any confidentialities that I may have heard in that meeting. But it's opening our eyes a little bit, so that what we thought we were doing so well is that we could do even better. And we also, a couple of years ago, the select board and the school board got together and we formed a committee called HCORI, and it's the Hartford Community Coalition for Racial Equity and Inclusion. I continue to be a member of that committee. It's a hardworking committee. It's was groundbreaking for us, but it again brought to light a lot of things that's going on with our students that maybe we hadn't been made aware of, and it's given. Interesting enough, I've got a couple of grandkids that are in the high school here, and some of their friends belong to some of these groups, and they have said, "You think we can come over and talk to your grandma?" And I said, absolutely, they can talk to me anytime they want to. But it's also given me a little bit of an eye-opener, again, to think that we thought we were doing gung-ho and we were doing everything so right, and we are, but we could still do better, and we could still do better to help the students to cope with some of the issues that they're having to cope with. And not only the students, but some of the staff also.
Great. Yeah, I think, having student representation on a school boards is great opportunity.
Oh, yeah.
But it has to be more than just the update on the last ball game score, when the next dance is, those kinds of things. And I know Flor has a couple of very, how do I say it real polite way? Because I mean it well. They're authentic, vocal. They're very vocal student reps. And how does that help your board, Flor?
Well, I think it keeps us grounded, and they are not afraid of saying it as it is. The tricky part that is it changes every couple of years, right? Every year it changes because we have a junior and a senior, and they don't vote, but we have created an environment where they can share all they want, how they feel, and they're very creative. So they've helped us with creative ideas, but they've also hold us accountable. I am actually wondering if Neil will share, because this is something I learned, I think it was at the conference or our last meeting. We also have a student council, but our student council doesn't have power. And I think as school boards, we could better use our student councils to share with our student reps at our career center. We are aspirational right now. We are going to have 2 students or 3 students in our board. We haven't been able to have them yet at our meeting, but it is super important. So Neil, I wonder if you wanted to share, or if I'm putting you in the spot.
No, that's okay. I think we almost have another webinar that just was all about student voice, right, in board operations. But I can share one thing that we do in our district. It's at the high school level. So we do have a student council. I think the thing that's a little bit unique about our situation, though, is our student council actually exists in school board policy, and the council actually has authority. So they have the ability to make decisions on anything that aren't otherwise covered by board policy or state or administration rules. Council's actually been in existence. We just celebrated the 50th anniversary of it just a couple weeks ago. But I can point to a couple to give you an example of what council has the ability to make decisions on. Most recently was a change in mascot. So that was entirely initiated and decided by council. They want to change it from the Hanover Marauder, and it is now the Hanover Bear. They've also made changes, decisions related to grading and homework policies at the high school. So they do have authority, and their student voice is also represented on the board as a liaison. But as I mentioned, it really goes much farther than that liaison role. They have authority to make decisions.
I think that's great. I do hope that next year we have at least one really good breakout session on how to make the best use of student representatives on a school board. And perhaps some of you or those that listen to this might be compelled to say, well, let's tell our story or join a panel on that as well. I'm thinking about Jody, and just, she was at conference as a superintendent, but also from the tech center. And I'm curious how the content at conference weaves into her work, or maybe helped her think about something more deeply or differently. Jody, anything you would share?
Yeah, I think equity work looks similar and different across every place that we go to. And one of the things that I think about, and I think it's important to know that I came from regular ed. I was a history teacher at one of my sending schools, and then an assistant and associate principal at one of my sending schools. So I came from regular ed into CTE for a number of reasons. And one is recognizing that students don't access career and technical education soon enough. And some of them never get the opportunity when it might have been the best option for them. And so thinking about ways to make sure that students are well aware of the flexible pathways they have before them, whether it's CTE or something else, and that those personalized learning plans are real and exist, and maybe even some sort of common formula, and that students really are driving their own learning through that. And that relates too to it's hard to step away from what we've always done. And I think I personally thought when we shut down for COVID that we were going to come out of it with some aha moments and an opportunity to make huge change. And we've gone sort of back to what we did before. So I'm really hopeful that we continue to have conversations about how the kids are doing, bring the students into those conversations. We've been trying to get students to our Career Center School District Board for the first few meetings this year. I think we're finally have some coming next week. I'm really excited to see what they're going to contribute and have to say about this, because as a brand new school district, we are building the system, and we're thinking about changes that we can make next year and 5 years down the road. And how do we make sure that students across our sending schools and other places see what happens in our programs? How do we build our programs even stronger? Last year, as part of our comprehensive local needs assessment, which every CTE has to do every 2 years, we learned from students who don't attend CTE that they don't attend because they think they can't go to college if they attend CTE. and they don't realize that they get college credits by attending, or industry recognized certificates by attending CTE. And so finding ways to make sure that everyone knows what opportunities are available for them, not just CTE, but across the board, the early college, the dual enrollment sort of things. What opportunities are there, and how might they get ahead in maybe their dream job, their career, while in school, and use the resources that are currently available to them instead of racking up debt later or whatever it might be. So finding more ways for students to drive their learning and to also realize all the opportunities for them.
Which sounds like a great breakout session to me for next year. Flora, I've been wondering, and I'm thinking about, as part of this webinar, really just, how does a board superintendent team, how do they apply learning from an event into their work? And I've watched you this year pack around 2 different books that I'm suspecting you ran into at a conference. And one was from a colleague in Illinois, Patrick Rice. And the other one was from a guy who's got a very memorable story about blueberries and ice cream, who is a business leader, but Jamie Vollmer. So were those authors you came across at a conference like this, or tell us your version of the story?
So Jamie Vollmer was one of the first conferences, and maybe it was the third conference that I attended as the VSBA. He was the main speaker at the VSBA and VSA conference. And I was just intrigued from his point of view, and I used his book through passing a bond in for our elementary school, and also as we were just an elementary board, but his foundation. So attending this kind of conferences has been super helpful. Besides keeping me grounded to what others are doing, it has helped me bring resources and new knowledge to my board. So we use that. I use that book with my smaller board. Then the Patrick Rice book, we read it as a board, and that one was at a national conference. And then we've been reading right now for development, just the work in governance, Phil's book, just to try to align, like us being a learning community to not just the leadership team. So we have found out over the years that the more informed that board members are, the better more members they are, and the better they would understand. So having conferences that are centered around students and what best practices and governance and centers are super beneficial for both superintendents and board members. We still have lots of work to do in budgeting as boards for our professional development too. And partnering with all superintendents to understand the importance of boards being long life learners too, right?
I wonder if others could share something just in your experience. How do you bring learning back from a conference or an event like this, and then get your fellow board members or your team members sort of enthused about it? Like, how do you bring it back so that the learning actually makes a difference for the school system? Any thoughts on that, of what you have done or what you might do? My board used to always show up at conference, and we went to conferences together. We went to the state conference, we went to the national conference, and we went every year. And we'd go through the program and we'd do this sort of divide and conquer thing, where, oh, you're interested in sports in the stadium, why don't you go to this session? And then you go to that session, and I'll go to this. And then we'd sit down at lunch and we'd all be talking at once, trying to share our enthusiasm or sell what our idea was from the session we just went to. And I realized over time that really isn't the best approach. The divide and conquer and then come back and try to sell somebody on your idea, it can be, it can help people have an experience that's interesting to them. But it always seems like the big difference comes when a board comes together and has a learning experience opportunity with the superintendent. Just a whole lot more likelihood that something positive could change. Any thoughts on that? Again, just how do you bring learning back to people, maybe folks who weren't there?
I will admit, Phil, I mean, locally, I found that challenging, right? So especially when you don't get, when only some of your board members went and others didn't, right? And so for me, I think step one is to see, what can folks do locally to try to get all of your board to attend. And I know it's not easy, but I do think that it's worthwhile. The other thing that I will add, and it's not maybe a direct answer to your question, Phil, but there's this aspect of don't worry if something doesn't immediately happen after a conference. I say that because a few years back, and might have been one of the last ones that we had in person, one of the focuses of the conference was how do we, for those school districts that are trying to do strategic planning, it was all about portrait of a graduate, right? And I had one other board member with me at that conference and our superintendent, and we sat through that and our eyes sort of got wide and we're like, this is exactly what we need. It was just a little bit too early. And we didn't get to that effort until a year or two after that. But what we learned at that conference reinforced in our minds the approach that we wanted to take when it was our turn to do it. And so I don't want boards to get discouraged. Right? You come away from a conference, you're all excited, you want to go gung-ho on what you just heard, and things sort of fizzle out. Don't think that that's the end of it, right? Because I think it can come back if you just are patient, and it needs to come at the right time sometimes.
Nancy, what would you add to that?
I was just thinking about before I was going to educational conferences and I was going to other professional conferences, that we did a lot of what you had said when we get together. Okay, you're going to go in special ed and you're going to go over here to this one and you're going to go to that one. And just like you said, you come back and you're all enthused about what you went to. And then Jody might be all enthused about what she went to, and Chelsea's all enthused about her she went to, and everybody was to talk at once, and everybody's still all excited, and the adrenaline's really flowing. And then you sit down and take a breath, and you go, okay, now what do we do? But what we, quite unintentionally, our board and superintendent, we ended up in the equity audits altogether. And that was interesting for us. And then we did have quite a discussion about it later. And I thought that was kind of interesting because that's not something that I would normally have gone to. But somebody said to me, one of the other board members says, well, what is that? And I said, I'm not really quite sure. Why don't we just go in there and we'll learn about it. We'll learn about it and see what we can do with it. And then we had a great discussion, the whole group, as we were sitting around breakfast or lunch, whichever it was, and we were talking about it. And so it's brought some new ideas and some new thoughts into our board that we hadn't discussed before. And I've been on this board for 6 years, and it's never been something that we've discussed. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And again, it was just strictly oh, look, we're all here in the same room. And it's talking about these equity audits. I think the enthusiasm of getting as many board members there as possible, and then not to let the enthusiasm die. We were obviously all in to watch the movie, listen up, and we were all just scribbling notes back and forth the whole time to each other. Well, and this and this and this and this and this, and we're going to be doing it in our community. We're going to be showing it in our community, but we stepped back and took a deep breath and said, okay, now we're really excited about it. We think this is really an important issue for our district, but we need to be really careful as to how we're going to plan this out. I had a great conversation with Neil about it that last day. He gave me some great leadership on that for me to be able to also take back to our board on that. That's about it.
That's a lot, though. I mean, that's a lot. I love that you had this serendipitous learning experience, right? Where you didn't all plan to go to that panel. And Chelsea may want to say something about that, because that was really added in at her behest or suggestion in the last couple of weeks before conference, right, Chelsea?
Thank you.
And just the fact that you all were able to and made it into there and have that kind of shared learning, that's very powerful. I do think we need to incentivize board superintendent teams coming together. Maybe we give an apple pie to them, like nobody else gets dessert, just people who, something, right? You all certainly deserve something
Well, it was great for us.
Yeah. Chelsea, anything you would add about the equity audits and that idea of just being in the right place at the right time?
Yeah, I think like even in my past experiences going to conferences, it's not necessarily always the content I get from the presenters, but just the conversation that it spurs with colleagues. And I also think that sometimes we expect for there just to be these huge aha moments. And like Neil said, it's not till later sometimes where it's like, oh, this actually did really impact what we ultimately ended up doing. The equity audits thing, in the planning, we're constantly trying to negotiate like how much free time should we give to like network with colleagues and have kind of that organic bringing together of people, and how much content should we be providing. And so we had that as a solely networking time leading up to the conference. And I had been doing a lot of work talking with boards and superintendents about equity audits. I was like, let's just throw in a panel so that people have an option. They can either go walk outside with colleagues or they can go to the panel. And it came together in like the 2 weeks before the conference. So I'm glad that it was worth at least someone's time to go to that. There are a number of people doing equity audits. There are different types of equity audits, some that are more suitable to the board's role and some more like curriculum type audits. And I'd be happy to talk with anyone who's interested in that work further. So Nancy, if you didn't get enough of the information you need, please feel free to reach out.
Love it. Love the nice.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Do you mind if I say one more thing? I think like I talked earlier about like the equity lens, and I will say something that's been really useful to me, both in the planning. I was never on a school board. So this was kind of like the more foreign PD offering that I had to jump into 4 years ago. And over time, I think one of the things that's been really useful, it was essential in planning the Act One working group slides and content, was looking at everything in this conference with the essential school boards lens. So I even think of like, well, what are students supposed to be doing? Like, I would even question, like, should we be looking with our students at the essential role of school boards and back designing what it is that the student's role can be in each of those pillars of work? And I think we'd be surprised with like how intuitive and insightful students can be. Like, I think as adults, we maybe sometimes don't credit them as much as we could. And that essential work of school boards book has been entirely helpful for me in framing PD. And I think it is definitely a touch point for others to use as like kind of a lens of everything that we do. Making sure we stay in the roles and responsibilities.
Yeah. Coming back to that, foundations of good governance, that we were privileged to have multiple students with us on Friday. Not only were they part of discussion in the keynote, but they participated in some small group discussions afterwards. And I just wanted to highlight, as Nancy mentioned, this musical Listen Up. It is available, very inexpensive. This is just a screenshot of the website where you can rent it or purchase it. I think unlimited showings of it is $20. It's a 90-minute film. We were able to show 50 to 60 minutes of it in the session on Friday. But it's very, very well done, and lots of student voice, lots of student led, as Bess talked about, the producer. The students put together original music for this, and it was students from all over the state of Vermont. But I was just so impressed with the theatrical kind of components of it, cinematography, if you will, where they actually started this outside while it was still daylight, and then it transitions to night. So you've got just an amazing effect there. These resources and slides are available on the VSBA website for under annual conference. There's clickable links, and everybody that was at the conference should have that in an email. But feel free to contact us if you're having any difficulty accessing that. Jody, I was working with a school system recently doing strategic planning with them, and one of the things they merged was the idea of pushing tech learning down to lower grades. And I just want to bring that to you as I'm sure it would be sort of music to your ears. The idea they were trying to get students to have more exposure, perhaps 5th, 6th, 7th grade, to tech opportunities, and seeing that as, you know, potential pathways and expanded learning. I thought that was great. I'm wondering thinking about how we get perhaps you and whomever else appropriate presenting at conference in the future about different types of pathways and what you were sharing with us earlier.
I would welcome that discussion and opportunities to participate. And I think it's great. I've been looking at ways to do that myself just within my region. And there's certainly a lot that could be done to expand on that. So it would be great. We need some rules changes as well. So the legislature needs to take it up and make sure that we have opportunities for kids to access earlier.
Yeah, I'm wondering, you know, if there's anybody participating that has a question or a comment that you'd like to share, we would be more than happy to entertain that, either respond to a question or point you to some resources. Neil, I wondered too, though, as we look and give any opportunity for a question to come in, could you give us a recap of the VSBA annual meeting? I mean, this happens in conjunction as a major part of the day at conference, and are there some things that you would like to highlight for that about that?
Yeah, we can just cover it briefly. It is the one thing standing between you know, the sessions of the day and happy hour, right? So we try to get things done as efficiently and quickly as possible. We had a short slate of resolutions on the table this year. All of the resolutions that came forward to membership passed this year. Some bylaws changes, those passed as well, the details of which folks can now find on the VSBA website. I won't go into those in detail, but you know, once again, we exist because of our members, and the resolutions form the foundation of our advocacy and the work that we do at VSBA, and so we certainly appreciate the you know, the feedback that we get from our members and how we come up with those resolutions.
Yeah, it's very important to maintain sort of that grassroots process and our identity as a membership association. It's always intriguing to hear a school board member sort of complain about different things, process or positions of their state association, and then, you know, I guess like most people complaining about things, they weren't necessarily stepping up to offer suggestions and involvement. So certainly something we'd like to continue to encourage is that, you know, that everybody participates, right? And is well represented.
Yeah, I would say, so for folks that did go to the conference, they should have gotten a post-conference survey via email. Highly encourage you to fill that out for a couple of reasons. You know, let us know what you liked, but secondly, you know, let us know what we could do in the future, right, to make the conference even better. Particularly, you know, my interest in, and I know it's Phil's as well too, right? How can we increase attendance, right? How can we get more folks to come to these meetings? And so if you've got thoughts around that, please share those with us so that we can consider them over the course of these next several months as we plan for next year's conference.
Do any of you have anything you'd like to add when you reflect on the conference or as we think about the fall conference for 2023? Any closing remarks?
I think the only other one that I will add, Phil, is for board members that may be watching or tune into this later. Please budget for this, right? I think for a lot of boards, what they forget to do, or maybe even don't think to do, right, is to add budget money so that your board members can attend the annual conference and can actually partake in other VSBA events. It is money well spent. It is not a lot of money. And there is great value for the dollars that you set aside for this opportunity. So I would highly encourage folks. Now is budget season. Now's the time to do it. Now's the time to get it in there.
Thank you, Neil. Nancy?
Yes, I told this to Neil while we were still at the conference. Of all the conferences I've gone to from the VSBA annual conferences, that this was absolutely the best. I got the most out of. I thought it was the most down to earth, and yet it said exactly what we've all been talking about for a full year, and that is, how are our students doing? And I think that it hit the nail on the head. So Chelsea, thank you for the part that you played in getting this all together, and for the other people from VSBA that helped me get it all together. I cannot stop talking about this conference. And I know that people are tired of hearing me talk about it, but that's okay, because I'm still going to talk about it. I got so much out of it, and so much that our board is talking about other things than putting out those fires that we've been putting out for the past year or so. So my appreciation, and I cannot encourage people enough to come to these conferences. As Nielsen and Phil said, there's so much for you to get out of it and to take it back and to work together.
Thank you to each of our panelists for your contribution to just sort of ongoing improvement and success in the things that we do. We certainly want to also say thank you to all the school board members who volunteer their time and service on behalf of their community and for the future of their children. So thank you, and have a great rest of the day.